Hello, Toronto. This is Dan Arth, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the May 20th, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. And from the headlines, Snowbirds to be grounded for years. Article by Mark Ramsey. Look up Toronto. This summer's Snowbird show at the Canadian National Exhibition will be the last chance for Torontonians to watch the iconic air demonstration squadron for years. The Carney government said Tuesday it's grounding the more than 5-decade-old fleet next year with an eye to replacing the aircraft by the early 2030s, but did not give a specific date for the Snowbirds' return. Touting the famed show as absolutely extraordinary and a source of pride, Prime Minister Mark Carney framed the decision as a necessity even as his government pulls the plug on the aging fleet several years before previously planned and with upgrades still being delivered. I inherited a situation where the planes literally had come to the end of their lives, Carney told reporters at an unrelated announcement in Quebec. They were unique in many respects. They didn't have the parts and other things to safely fly. Making the announcement in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan at the Royal Canadian Air Force's Air Crew Training Center, Defense Minister David McGuinty said the Snowbird CT-114 Tudor jets will be replaced by a fleet of Swiss-made CT-157 Siskin II planes. The current CT-114 fleet was built in Canada for the RCAF in the mid-1960s. McGuinty said, "We have every assurance that the fleet is well positioned to serve for another season, but the decision to transition to a new fleet was made on the recommendation of Canada's Air Force. Those negotiations are underway with the manufacturer, and we intend to procure those aircraft as quickly as we possibly can," McGuinty said when pressed about the timeline. "The fact that the aircraft we are selecting will also be used as our future training aircraft, just as the Tudor was when it was originally selected, will allow us to accelerate procurement, create a larger pool of pilots to be able to fly in the Snowbirds, and ensure that we do not end up operating an orphan fleet of aircraft." The announcement comes after weeks of pressure from the Conservatives in Parliament, who accused the Carney government of quietly planning to ground the fleet. At the time, McGuinty said the Snowbirds will continue air demonstrations with the Tudor fleet for as long as it is feasible and safe. He later said on social media that Canadians can rest assured that they will be able to enjoy the iconic Snowbird formation for generations to come. The commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force acknowledged Tuesday there had been several efforts to keep the planes flying, including cockpit upgrades as recently as 2020 for 11 of the aircraft. Some parts are still being delivered, Lieutenant General Jamie Spicer Blanchett said. In the original plans, there was work that was underway to extend the life to 2030. Spicer Blanchett told reporters. However, some of the airframe engine and escape system programs feasibility studies were done, and there are some engineering challenges because of the age of the aircraft that have changed that situation. Dan Dempsey of the Snowbird Alumni Association said while he acknowledges the government's commitment to equip the Snowbirds with a new aircraft platform in the future, concerns remain regarding the loss of operational expertise and the prolonged interruption of one of Canada's most important military outreach programs during the transition period. The Snowbirds' public schedule currently lists 27 events for this year, including Canada Day celebrations in Ottawa and the Canadian International Air Show in Toronto from September 5th to the 7th. The final scheduled performance is in California on October 11th, But Spicer Blanchett said that could change. We always have the season closing show here in Moose Jaw, so we'll make sure that we celebrate appropriately, Spicer Blanchett said. And our next article, also from the headlines, Young Subway Project Delayed. Extensions will not open till mid-2030s, TTC emails reveal. Article is by Andy Takagi. The subway extension connecting the TTC to Richmond Hill has been delayed, according to internal documents from the transit agency, making it the latest Toronto transit project to fall behind schedule. While the Yonge North Subway extension had been publicly set to open in 2032, internally the TTC is expecting the project to be completed in the mid-2030s, with 2034 given as a potential opening date by one staff member. The latest opening dates are found in TTC emails obtained by the Star through a Freedom of Information request. The Star reported last week that the Scarborough Subway extension has also been delayed by 3 years. Metrolinx has struggled to build other major transit lines in Toronto on time. The Eglinton Crosstown LRT was repeatedly delayed, taking 15 years to construct. The Finch West LRT also fell behind schedule, opening 4 years past its original date. The Yonge Subway extension will push the Yonge Street side of Line 1 north by 8 kilometers, adding 5 new stations from Finch, stretching toward Richmond Hill, with planned stops at Steeles, Clark, Royal Orchard Bridge, connecting to Langstaff GO, and High Tech. The extension is being built by Metrolinx, the provincial transit agency, but the TTC will run the trains that go through the 5 new stations. Metrolinx and TTC regularly share information for planning purposes on projects, as was the case during the opening of the Finch and Eglinton LRTs, but the Freedom of Information documents do not explicitly cite Metrolinx as the source of the delayed timeline. At an August 2025 press conference, Metrolinx CEO Michael Lindsay said the Yonge North Subway extension would open only once the Ontario line is completed, in order to avoid putting ridership stress on Line 1. The Ontario line for now does not have a concrete opening date. Originally scheduled to open in 2027, it was delayed to 2031. At a press conference in February, Lindsay said that the line would be completed in the early 2030s. Neither Metrolinx nor Transportation Minister Pramit Sarkaria's office confirmed the delayed timeline for the subway extension and did not respond to questions about whether the cost of the project has increased as a result. Sarkaria's spokesman, Dakota Brazier, said these are TTC documents. Metrolinx is the contractor. Yonge North Subway Extension continues to make progress, with early upgrade work at Finch Station completed and tunneling work underway. Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario awarded a $1.4 billion public-private partnership contract for tunneling nearly a year ago in August 2025. Asked about the delays on both the Yonge North and Scarborough subway extensions, Metrolinx spokesperson Lindsay Miller said, "We continue to move as quickly as possible to bring extended subway service to more communities in York Region and Scarborough." The Yonge North extension has been under consideration for decades, predating the Ford government, but was pushed ahead as part of Premier Doug Ford's $28.5 billion transit expansion plan, released in April 2019. At the time, the 8-kilometer extension was expected to cost $5.6 billion. As of March, the project budget was set at $1.4 billion, but that estimate did not include contracts that have not yet been awarded. Originally, the province's plan was to extend Line 1 below Yonge Street, fully underground, with up to 6 stations at an estimated cost of $9.3 billion. But in 2021, the government and Metrolinx announced new plans for the extension with only 5 stations, with the line veering eastward near Holly Cross Cemetery and running above ground to Richmond Hill Center. In 2024, the Star reported the new route would benefit some of Ontario's most prominent developers who own land where two of the new stations will be located. The Ford government defended the move in response, saying the new route would be less disruptive to the local community. Next article, World Cup news. Eateries, bars can sell booze until 4 a.m. Some LCBO stores will have extended hours during the event. Article by Rob Ferguson and Josh Rubin. Can you stay awake until FIFA last call? Bars and restaurants will be allowed to serve booze until 4 a.m. and hours are being extended in select LCBO stores during the World Cup, Attorney General Doug Downey announced on Tuesday. With games in Western time zones in Canada, the United States, and Mexico, the temporary changes to regulations means fans can fully experience the energy, excitement, and atmosphere of the tournament while supporting jobs, strengthening local businesses, Downey said in a statement. Longer hours will be in effect from June 11th to July 19th. Last call is currently at 2 a.m. Callum Woods, co-owner of the Doc Ellis Sport Bar in Little Portugal, is expecting big crowds during the World Cup and is hoping to generate extra revenue. We'll definitely be taking advantage of it, said Woods, adding he'd prefer to see extended hours become a permanent feature. It's opt-in anyway. If you want to close at 6 p.m., you can close at 6 p.m., he said. While soccer fans can have a rowdy reputation, Woods said people shouldn't be concerned about the hordes of inebriated people wandering the streets at all hours because of the later hours. This is Toronto. People drink responsibly, Woods said. But not everybody's leaping at the opportunity. Daniel Barnia, founder of Danny's Pizza Tavern and Danny's Next Door, said neither place is likely to take advantage of the extended hours. While Danny's Next Door frequently shows sporting events, it doesn't always attract a huge late-night crowd, said Barnia. I think it's great that they're doing it, but it doesn't work for every single place, he said. It makes more sense for real party spots, but we're more of a neighborhood bar tavern. The customers could potentially get rowdy, but that's not his only reason for taking a pass. There is the old adage, he said, that nothing good ever happens after 2 a.m., but I also don't want to subject my staff to having to work that late, especially when 99% of the games are going to end before 2 a.m. anyway, said Barnia. Hours in 27 Toronto area and Ottawa LCB stores will be from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. 6 days a week and 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Sundays. Toronto is hosting 6 of the World Cup's 48 games. Vancouver is also a host, along with 14 cities in the U.S. and Mexico. And we'll move over to weather. Today's forecast: high of 15, low of 6. Mix of sun and clouds for today. Chance of rain about 40%. In the local 5-day forecast, tomorrow, high of 12, low of 7, and it will be mainly sunny. Chance of rain about 20%. Winds today about 20 kilometers per hour, and tomorrow about 15. On Friday, the high of 13, starting out the weekend, with a low of 9, mix of sun and clouds, and chance of rain about 30%, winds about 16 kilometers per hour. And then Saturday, dipping down a little bit more, 10 degrees for the high with low of 9 degrees. Chance of rain about 70%, and winds will kick up on Saturday, 29 kilometers per hour. And then on Sunday will be a high of 13, a low of 12, chance of rain about 70%, winds at about 21 kilometers per hour. And then for Monday, going all the way out to Monday on the 5-day forecast, Monday will be a high of 17 and low of 12, chance of rain about 20%, mix of sun and clouds. The winds will be a little bit calmer at 10 kilometers per hour. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, our next article, we're moving over to the sports section and the NHL playoffs. Marner shows he has staying power in Vegas. Forward trades Toronto Heat for Western final run. Article by Mark Anderson. Mitch Marner isn't the type to brag to those who doubted he could deliver at this time of the NHL season. But there has indeed been magic in Marner's play as he leads the Vegas Golden Knights into the Western Conference Final against the Colorado Avalanche starting Wednesday night, that's tonight, in Denver. Marner's league-leading 18 playoff points, including possibly the goal of the year in Thursday's 5-1 closeout victory in Anaheim. This postseason production is what his hometown Maple Leafs expected when they drafted him fourth in 2015. While Marner did become one of the NHL's top playmaking forwards, he took the brunt of criticism for the Leafs failing to advance beyond the second round with him in the lineup. I don't care what anyone says, Marner said. I've been in the league a long time now, so I'll focus on what I can control. That includes leading the Golden Knights to the NHL's Final Four. I think the media in Toronto is pretty big, and they put a lot of pressure on the players. Golden Knights wing Ivan Barbashev said, he's showing completely different things over here. He's been scoring and making a lot of plays, so hopefully he stays the same way. Barbashev said, Vegas has never been afraid to chase big names and has a locker room full of such players. Acquiring Marner and a sign and trade was the splashy deal of the offseason, sealed with an 8-year, $96 million U.S. contract. This postseason is why the Knights pursued him. After winning the 2023 Stanley Cup, they had been bounced in the first round the following year and bounced in the second round last season. Marner produced 2 goals and assists in Game 6 of their opening series win over Utah. He had a hat trick when the Knights regained home ice advantage in Game 3 of the second round in Anaheim and scored a between-the-legs goal 62 seconds into the Game 6 clincher that few other players on the planet could execute. His IQ is on a different level, Barbashev said. He plays defensively and is a 200-foot player. He does it all. John Tortorella, who took over as the coach of the Knights with 8 games left in the regular season, sees the same qualities in Marner. When you're with him every day, you can see his habits, Tortorella said. You can see the little things he does in the game. Other people see his goals and assists, maybe like the goal he scored the other night. I look at the small things. A lot of people don't realize how the small things turn to bigger things, Tortorella said. Tortorella, like Bruce Cassidy before him, hasn't been afraid to use Marner at center or wing, first line or second. The Knights are 4 wins away from competing in their 3rd Stanley Cup final in 9 years, while the Leafs, who haven't won the Cup since 1967, failed to reach the playoffs but won the draft lottery. Maybe there's another Marner in their future. I've always believed I'm a good player, Marner said. I'm not thinking of anything else. Just go out there and try to play hockey. And staying in the NHL, some hockey briefs around the NHL. Vegas draft pick penalty stands. The Vegas Golden Knights appeal to have their punishment reduced for breaking media access rules was denied by the NHL, and they will lose a second-round pick in next month's draft. On Friday, the league docked Vegas the second-rounder and fined coach John Tortorella $100,000 US for what it called flagrant violations of media regulations. Tortorella refused to speak to reporters, and the team did not open its locker room following a series-clinching Game 6 victory over the Ducks in Anaheim on Thursday night. Cassidy case under scrutiny. The NHL Coaches Association said it is closely monitoring the situation involving Bruce Cassidy amid reports that the Vegas Golden Knights have denied Pacific Division rivals Edmonton and Los Angeles permission to speak with him about jobs. Cassidy was fired in late March, but is under contract through next season. Vancouver Canucks give Foote the boot. The Vancouver Canucks fired head coach Adam Foote after one last-place season. Along with assistants Scott Young, Kevin Dean, and Brett McLean, general manager Patrick Allvin was fired in April. Weeks later, president of hockey operations Jim Rutherford announced plans to step down. Last week, the Canucks named franchise greats Daniel and Henrik Sedin co-presidents and installed former teammate Ryan Johnson as general manager. And final hockey brief, Devils sticking with Keefe. Sonny Mehta, new general manager of the New Jersey Devils, announced head coach Sheldon Keefe will return for a third season despite missing the playoffs. Goaltending coach Dave Rogalski was fired, while assistant coach Sergei Brylin was reassigned within the organization. All right, staying within sports, but moving over to the NBA. NBA playoffs. Wembanyama issues strong rebuttal after missed MVP. Article by Dave Fishuk. There aren't many moments when it appears like a sport's balance of power is shifting before your eyes. But Monday night's Game 1 of the NBA's Western Conference Final felt a little bit like that. It wasn't simply because the defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder finally lost a playoff game after going undefeated in the opening two rounds of the postseason, and it wasn't simply because Victor Wembanyama led the San Antonio Spurs to a signature double overtime win with a stunning display of dominance. Even if you didn't watch the game, Wembanyama's stats jumped off the box score: 41 points on 25 shots, 24 rebounds in 49 minutes. At age 22, Wembanyama surpassed the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the youngest player in the history of the league to notch a 40-20 postseason performance. When Abdul-Jabbar did it as an NBA rookie in 1970, he was more than 7 months older than Wembanyama was on Monday night. But Abdul-Jabbar isn't the guy Wembanyama seemed bent on topping Monday. That'd be Hamilton's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on a night that saw the Canadian presented with his second straight NBA MVP trophy. Wembanyama was asked if he'd drawn inspiration from seeing Commissioner Adam Silver hand Gilgeous-Alexander the award before tip-off. "Yeah, for sure," he said. "It feels like I've still got a lot to learn, and I want to get that trophy many times in my career." Wembanyama made his case as the rightful MVP in March, but on Monday night he let his play do all the talking. Not only did he pull the trigger on the NBA on the shot of the NBA season to date, a 28-foot three-point bomb that tied the game with 27 seconds remaining in the first overtime. At a moment when it was easy to question whether the 7'4" Frenchman was running on fumes, he found another gear, single-handedly outscoring the Thunder 9-7 in the second overtime to propel his team to the win. After the game, Wembanyama was asked if he feels like he's the best player in the world. "Do I feel like it right now? I feel tired," he said, "but it's not a question I'm wondering right now. The world is 8 billion people, so that's 8 billion opinions. Nights like Monday can sway billions," as Wembanyama said when he stumped for his MVP candidacy. "Defense is 50% of the game, and in Game 1 the Thunder shot a dismal 2 for 10 from the field with Wembanyama as the primary defender, and passed up countless more shots when his 8-foot wingspan was lurking on one of those memorable misses, a 3-foot bunny that Gilgeous-Alexander short-armed with Wembanyama standing nearby. The Spurs center could be seen smiling and laughing as he corralled the rebound. It wasn't clear if Wembanyama was laughing at Gilgeous-Alexander or at the absurdity of his own physical superiority, but it's not the kind of thing you see in pro sports very often. What is scary for the rest of the league is that the Thunder are a proven great team that played an awfully good game. Not so much Gilgeous-Alexander, who needed 23 shots to get his 24 points, but OKC won the possession battle, shooting 101 field goals to San Antonio's 96. They converted 23 Spurs turnovers into 28 points, this while committing a respectable 15 turnovers of their own. Oklahoma City's superior bench, led by Alex Caruso's 31 points, with 8 for 14 shooting from three-point range, outscored San Antonio's reserves by a whopping 50-16. But it's not as though Wembanyama was playing alone out there. San Antonio backcourt starters Dylan Harper and Stephon Castle are 20 and 21 respectively. Harper, the son of former NBA player Ron Harper, did not look like a rookie in piling up 24 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, and 7 steals. And while Castle coughed up 11 turnovers on a night when the Spurs missed the steady hand of injured two-time All-Star guard De'Aaron Fox, Castle still had 17 points and 11 assists to balance out the mistakes. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And our next article, we're going to move over to the business section. No spring bloom for market, but home buyers are slowly coming back. Article by Sammy Hoods. Rosy outlooks for Canada's real estate sector at the start of this year rested on hopes of a fruitful spring market that experts say has yet to fully bloom. While data from local real estate boards suggests some regions have seen a modest rebound from last year's sluggish spring when newly issued tariffs chilled economic sentiment, many buyers remain on the sidelines. People just aren't as excited right now about real estate, said Tim Hill, a Vancouver-based agent with RE/MAX All Points Realty. The unfortunate reality is that people get excited when prices are going up and they start getting fear of missing out and capitalizing on that sale price. In Greater Vancouver, considered Canada's priciest market, sales were down 2.5% per year over year in April, which is the traditional start of the spring real estate market. Nationally, prices were up 2.2% last month as resale transactions fell 4% from April 2025, the Canadian Real Estate Association said. The CREA recently downgraded its 2026 forecast, citing continued trade uncertainty and factors related to the war in the Middle East, such as higher inflation tied to a spike in oil prices that could prompt the Bank of Canada to hike its key policy rate. The association expects 1% more home sales this year compared with 2025, down from its January estimate of 5.1% growth. I think we're going to have much of the same for the remainder of this year, Hill said. I'd be surprised if anything significantly changed in the market. BMO senior economist Robert Kapchik said the spring market likely hasn't peaked yet when it comes to sales volume. As demand picks up, he said sellers might be inclined to relist properties they'd taken down during the valleys of last year's downturn. That would prevent supply from shrinking in the near term, meaning prices could still struggle to gain traction. Kapchik said the conditions needed for a big rebound simply aren't in place at this point. Affordability has improved, but hasn't to a level that's going to pull a whole bunch of buyers off the sideline, he said. Adding mortgage rates haven't come down enough to move the needle either. We're kind of stuck in an environment where mortgage rates are going to basically be as you see them right now. In addition to borrowing costs not coming down further for the time being, the slow pace of the housing market turnaround is a culmination of other factors as well, said Zach Penley, who leads the real estate transactions and valuations practice for EY Canada. That includes the lack of population growth last year after the federal government slashed its immigration targets. Penley said it's no coincidence the real estate sector was red hot coming out of the pandemic when immigration intake was high, but now the reverse is playing out. Meanwhile, investor demand in condominiums has cratered, especially in Toronto and Vancouver, he added. That investor market was so healthy because you could buy a condo, turn around, rent it to a newcomer to Canada, rent it to a foreign student who needs a place to live, Penley said. With a slowdown in that population segment, it has had an impact on underlying demand for assets. Penley said both buyers and sellers are having to adjust expectations to a new reality. However, there are signs the worst of it may be over. We're certainly on the second half of this correction, he said. There's a belief now that it might be a good time to buy. I do not think buyers are going to flood back to the market overnight, but I do think that over the balance of this year, I would expect to see continued upward momentum. Prices remain a top-of-mind concern for buyers in the Toronto area, said Jessica Hamill of Real Broker Ontario, who described a tempered enthusiasm among those finally willing to consider a home purchase. In April, the GTA saw a 7% gain in sales over the previous year, but activity was still well below the same month in 2024. Average prices fell almost 5% from April 2025 to $1,051,969. I'm still seeing enthusiasm from first-time buyers who are excited to get out there in the market, but they're maybe a bit more selective and methodical than they were in the past, said Hamill, noting spring is considered a bellwether for the year's real estate market trends. Inventory in the region has fallen, and she said buyers are in no rush to make their move. A key underlying factor that will determine how much and when the resale market may come roaring back is the extent to which incomes are able to catch up with the prices, said Matthew Labarge, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp's chief economist. He said pent-up demand has been building, but the economy remains very uncertain with all that's happening globally. I think we've gotten a bit more accustomed to it. There's a bit more confidence building in Canada, but we're not out of the woods yet, Labarge said. And our next article, we're going to stay in the business section under economy. Annual inflation rate rose to 2.8% in April. Gas prices aside, economists call the results encouraging. Article by Anastasia Blosser. Canada's annual inflation rate jumped to 2.8% in April, the highest level in nearly 2 years, as surging gasoline prices tied to the war in Iran pushed costs higher across the country, according to data released by Statistics Canada Thursday. Disregarding the global oil shock and energy prices pushing inflation higher, economists say the report was otherwise relatively encouraging, with many underlying price pressures remaining subdued and on target. If it was not for the war with Iran, the Bank of Canada would have toyed with the idea of cutting rates, said CIBC Deputy Chief Economist Benjamin Tall. April's report marked an acceleration from March's 2.4% annual inflation rate, with energy prices rising nearly 20% year over year. Gasoline prices alone climbed 28.6% compared to April 2025, while prices for fuel oil and other fuels rose more than 40%. Economists said the April data suggests rising fuel prices have not yet spread broadly through the economy, which is an important distinction for policymakers watching for signs that elevated energy costs could become entrenched in consumer prices. The key issue here is the duration of the conflict. The longer it lasts, the more likely that higher energy inflation will start impacting the rest of the basket, and worse, might put higher pressure on inflation expectations. Tall said in such a case, the Bank of Canada will have little choice but to raise rates. BMO's chief economist Douglas Porter said economists widely expected inflation to rise after gasoline prices surged throughout April, but the increase came in lower than many forecasts. Inflation outside gasoline prices was 2%, right on the button, Porter said, noting that level aligns with the Bank of Canada's inflation target. This was not bad news. In Toronto, the average price of gasoline climbed by more than 50 cents per liter between December and April, rising from roughly $1.26 to $1.76. StatCan noted that the federal government's temporary suspension of the fuel excise tax in mid-April helped moderate prices somewhat, though not enough to offset the broader rise in global oil prices. Porter said the key concern now is whether elevated oil prices persist long enough to begin pushing up the cost of other goods, particularly food and consumer products that rely heavily on shipping and transportation. So far, economists say there is little evidence of that happening. Royce Mendez, head of macro strategy at Desjardins, said April's inflation report showed broader price pressures remained unusually muted, despite concerns that rising oil prices would bleed into core inflation measures. Prices excluding food and energy were unchanged in April, Mendez noted. He added that the breadth of unusually large price increases across the economy also narrowed in April. While that's still slightly elevated, recent price dynamics suggest that metrics should continue trending lower in the months to come, Mendez said. The soft inflation print gives the Bank of Canada ample scope to remain patient in assessing the fallout from higher oil prices. Statistics Canada said prices rose faster in every province except British Columbia, where inflation did not accelerate year over year. Ontario recorded the country's lowest inflation rate among the provinces at 2.4%, which Porter attributed partly to cooling shelter costs and weakness in the housing market. Meanwhile, prices for clothing and footwear rose 2% nationally in April after falling 0.4% in March, driven largely by a rise in women's clothing prices. Travel tour prices, however, fell 11% last month after climbing 11.5% in March, which Statistics Canada said reflected seasonal demand patterns following the winter travel season. While economists broadly agree the latest report does not yet warrant interest rate hikes, some warn that the prolonged instability in the Middle East could keep inflation elevated well into next year. Fuel analyst Roger McKnight said inflation numbers should continue to be upheld as long as any solution to the war in Iran remains precarious. Inventories of crude oil, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel are reaching dangerously low levels and will drive up the cost of all refined products, McKnight said, adding even if the conflict ended immediately, consumers might not see meaningful relief at the pumps for several weeks, and the economic barrage could extend into early 2027. There is no short-term relief in sight. And we'll stay within business. Experts say trial shows disconnect between AI and the public. Article by Barbara Ortute. Court fight between Musk, OpenAI offered behind-the-scenes look at top industry players. After prevailing in its court fight with Elon Musk, OpenAI, the ChatGPT maker, valued at $852 billion US, remains on track for what could be one of the largest initial public offerings in history. Musk had been seeking the ouster of his fellow OpenAI co-founder, CEO Sam Altman, among other changes to the company. But with testimony from witnesses who called Altman dishonest, he's hardly emerged unscathed. At a time of growing concern about effects of artificial intelligence, the landmark trial also shed new light on the flaws and outsized ambitions of the small number of billionaires steering the development of the breakthrough technology. The trial was a reminder, said Sarah Krebs, director of Cornell University's Tech Policy Institute, of how much the future of AI still depends on a remarkably small group of powerful tech figures and their personal rivalries. The trial highlighted not just a dispute between Musk and Altman, but a broader disconnect between the people building these systems and many of the people increasingly expected to live and work alongside them, Krebs said. Musk had accused OpenAI Altman and his top lieutenant Greg Brockman of betraying a shared vision for it to remain a non-profit dedicated to guiding AI's development for the good of humanity. Altman, in turn, accused Musk of trying to hobble the ChatGPT maker for the benefit of his own AI company. On Monday, the 9-person federal jury in Oakland, California, found Musk waited too long to file his lawsuit and missed a statutory deadline after a 3-week trial that included hundreds of pieces of evidence and some of tech's biggest names on the stand. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours before returning a verdict, essentially on a technicality. Musk said he will appeal and called Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers, who oversaw the trial, a terrible activist Oakland judge who simply used the jury as a fig leaf to create a bad precedent. She just handed out a free license to loot charities if you can keep the looting quiet for a few years, Musk wrote on X. It was the second major courtroom loss for Musk in less than 2 months. Gonzalez Rogers made it clear early on in the trial she did not want it to become a debate over AI's dangers, but the unresolved questions about the risks AI poses for job losses, mental health issues, and even humanity's extinction served as a backdrop for the proceedings, with protesters decrying both Musk and Altman becoming a regular presence outside the federal courthouse. Demonstrator signs declared the real losers were regular people whose lives are being upended by an industry controlled by out-of-touch billionaires who can't get along. The trial laid bare some of Silicon Valley's messy inner workings, with emails, diary entries, and sometimes embarrassing text message exchanges shown as evidence. Texts between Altman and a former OpenAI executive became meme fodder and the subject of parody songs. It is a lot of dirty laundry that doesn't look very appealing, I suppose, and so that may hurt their reputation and may have downstream effects on all kinds of things that you can't even anticipate, said University of Richmond Law School professor Carl Tobias. But you know, AI is likely to come forward and continue even if it isn't open AI. And moving back to news, our next article from the Toronto Star: Ford Fest to be held near riding facing by-election. Premier chooses Scarborough Park for annual event. Article by Robert Benzie. Premier Doug Ford is hosting his annual public picnic in Scarborough ahead of a looming summer by-election there. Hi everyone, I'm thrilled to invite you to Ford Fest in Scarborough. Ford Fest is only 1 month away, the Premier announced on social media on Tuesday. Ford said the progressive conservative event will be June 19th from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Thompson Memorial Park on Brimley Road, north of the vacated riding of Scarborough Southwest. Get ready. Get ready for an evening of fun and community spirit. Enjoy free hamburgers, hot dogs, halal burgers, and veggie burgers, and be one of the first 500 guests to get a free giveaway. Plus, the kids can enjoy free carnival rides, he said. The move comes as Ford is expected to call Scarborough Southwest by-election in July or August to fill the vacancy left by the departure of former NDP MPP Dali Begum, who won a federal by-election in the riding last month and is now a Liberal MP. In an April interview with the Star, the Premier admitted it would be daunting for the governing Tories to take the seat that Begum secured for the New Democrats in 2018, 2022, and last year. Asked if former City Councillor Gary Crawford, who lost to Liberal Andrea Hazel in the July 2023 Scarborough-Guildwood by-election, would again be running for the Tories, Ford said nothing's beneficial yet. Coincidentally, Ford Fest was held in Scarborough before that by-election, which did not put the Tories over the top. The Liberals have nominated entrepreneur Asnil Havis as their candidate, but runner-up Nate Erskine Smith, the Beach's East York Grit MP, is challenging the result amid allegations of irregularities. An arbitration committee headed by former Provincial Cabinet Minister David Zimmer will meet Wednesday behind closed doors at the Sheridan Center to hear the appeal. The hearing is closed to the media and a ruling is expected later. The New Democrats have nominated tenant advocate Fatima Shaban, who lost to Begum in April's federal by-election. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And staying within news, Mayor says police chief must regain public trust. City officials call for accountability following arrest of 3 off-duty officers in Barcelona. Article by Raju Mudar. Public officials are calling for accountability after 3 Toronto police officers were arrested while vacationing in Spain. On Tuesday, Mayor Olivia Chow said in the wake of the Spanish charges on the heels of the fallout from Project South, which saw 1 former and 7 current Toronto police officers arrested amid allegations that information had been leaked from police databases to known criminals, Police Chief Myron Demka has a lot of work to do to earn back the public's trust. Councillor Shelley Carroll, chair of the Toronto Police Service Board, echoed the sentiment. The reports emerging from Spain involving Toronto police officers are serious and troubling. The people of Toronto expect police officers to uphold the highest standards of conduct, both on and off duty, to maintain public trust. These matters must be dealt with swiftly and seriously by the Toronto Police Service, said Carroll in an emailed statement. Last Wednesday, 3 Toronto police officers were involved in an incident in Barcelona involving a sex worker in a taxi. 1 officer was charged with sexual assault and assault. Another was charged with resisting arrest. It's unclear what the 3rd was charged with. Chow cautioned, until found guilty, we have to presume that these officers are innocent. According to police, all 3 officers have now returned to Canada and have been suspended with pay in accordance with the Community Safety and Policing Act, CPSA. We are still working to determine the circumstances surrounding the arrests and charges laid by police in Spain. We'll provide more information when we can, but we are not identifying the officers at this time, said Stephanie Sayer, spokesperson for Toronto Police. The alleged actions of 3 off-duty officers do not reflect the professionalism and integrity of the thousands of Toronto Police Service members who serve this city every day. Our officers are just as concerned by these allegations as the public. They know incidents like this damage public trust and make policing harder for those who do this work honorably, Sayer said. One of the force's former members has recently raised questions about misconduct in Toronto police ranks. Hank Insignia, a former Toronto homicide detective, recently published an autobiography which detailed racism, anti-Semitism, and an overall lack of leadership. The Police Service Board has asked for an independent investigation into those allegations. And our next article is from the opinion page. Premier Ford, we told you so. Data shows significant increase in speeding after removal of speed cameras. Article by Matt Elliott. At the risk of sounding a little smug and a little childish, I've got something I just have to say to Premier Doug Ford. Told you so. Told you so. Told you so. Told you so. When the Premier moved to ban municipalities across the province from using automated speed cameras last November, he said the cameras were an ineffective cash grab. He promised that other measures like supersized speed limit signs would do a better job of slowing down drivers. Lots of people told Ford he was wrong. I certainly did. School boards did. The Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police did. Research from the Hospital for Sick Children did. His own government's study did. Really? But the Premier dismissed all criticism and evidence and sped forward anyway. 6 months later, though, all of us get to say, told you so. The data is definitive, showing a significant increase in the number of speeding cars in the months following the removal of the speed cameras in Toronto. Last week, advocacy group Safe Parkside published data showing that the number of cars going 60 kilometers per hour or faster on the corridor, 20 over the speed limit, had increased by 235%. That's based on data reported from one of the city's digital Watch Your Speed signs. You've seen them around. They're typically posted near schools. They flash with your car's speed as you pass by, hopefully serving as a visual reminder when necessary that you should slow the heck down. They also, it turns out, keep a permanent record of speeds. Using the same basic methodology as Safe Parkside, I looked at data from more than 800 sites with these digital signs. In October 2025, the last full month before Ford's ban on speed cameras took effect, the digital signs collectively recorded 626,137 vehicles exceeding the posted speed limit by at least 20 kilometers per hour. In April, with no more fear of speed cameras, the number nearly doubled to more than 1 million. Of 837 sites I looked at with data from both before and after the speed camera ban, the number of drivers doing 20 clicks over the limit increased at 476 of them. Before the program was put on ice, the city had 150 speed cameras that rotated through locations like these. Some of the signs saw some really staggering increases. A sign near St. Richard Catholic School on Bellamy Road in Scarborough went from recording a pre-ban average of about 604 speeding cars to 1,581 on average in the months following. Across town, a sign close to St. Elizabeth Catholic School near the East Mall went from an average of 1,990 extreme speeders to 5,112. Digital signs near Dr. Marion Hilliard Senior Public School, St. Clement Catholic School, St. Pius X Catholic School, Mill Valley Junior School, and the Grove Community School have also measured steep increases in the number of speeding cars. Schools in Scarborough and Etobicoke have seen the most significant increases, but the effect is noticeable citywide. To make matters worse, the trend before Ford's ban was clear. Speeds at most of these sites were following a downward trajectory. Now, the trend has reversed, and with Ford offering little except giant signs and some money to eventually install some speed bumps, it's up to Toronto City Hall and other municipal governments to figure out a way to deal with the rise in speeding traffic near school zones and other places where pedestrians and cyclists will be put at risk. For those seeking the job of mayor in Toronto in this year's election, that should start with being ready to ask some tough questions to the police about their traffic enforcement efforts or lack thereof. The data suggests that once the threat of a speed camera ticket went away, a lot of drivers immediately started operating with near zero concern that they might get pulled over by a cop for speeding in a school zone. The mayor has limited powers to tell the police to step up enforcement efforts, but whoever wins the job could, at the very least, use their spot on the police board to demand more transparency about how much enforcement is happening. One of the unheralded benefits of the speed camera program for municipalities was that the cameras produced timely data about how much speeding was happening and where. This allowed City Hall to target speeding hotspots for infrastructure upgrades like speed bumps or road redesigns. The police, in contrast, provide very little public information about where they are enforcing the rules of the road. The speed data we have indicates they're not enforcing anywhere near enough to make up for the loss of speed cameras. A very predictable outcome, sure, but still one that demands a speedy response and a hearty told you so too. And our final article will go over to World News, Middle East. UAE says attacks came from Iraq. Iranian-backed Shiite militias suspected to be behind assault that targeted nuclear power plant. Article by John Gambrell and Michelle Price. Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The drones that targeted the United Arab Emirates Barakah nuclear power plant all came from Iraq, the country's defense ministry said on Tuesday. An indication that Iraqi Shiite militias backed by Iran were likely behind the assault. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but Tehran and its militia proxies have launched repeated drone attacks targeting Gulf Arab states since Israel and the United States began their war against Iran on February 28th. There were no reported injuries or radioactive leaks at Barakah after the attack, which Emirati officials said hit a generator on the facility's perimeter. But at an emergency UN Security Council session on Tuesday, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog described his agency's grave concerns about the growing trend of targeting operating nuclear plants in the Iran war. In case of an attack on the Barakah nuclear power plant, a direct hit could result in a very high rate of radioactivity to the environment, said Rafael Grossi, the International Atomic Energy Agency chief. The UAE, which has hosted air defenses and personnel from Israel, recently accused Iran of launching drone and missile attacks even after its ceasefire with the U.S. began April 8th. U.S. President Donald Trump said Tuesday is willing to give Iran a few days to make progress in peace negotiations before the U.S. resumes military strikes. Later in the day, the Senate advanced a bill aiming to force Trump to seek congressional approval or withdraw from the war, though it was not clear whether the legislation could gain final passage. Tensions have risen over the Strait of Hormuz, a vital energy waterway gripped by Iran while its ports remain under a U.S. naval blockade. A maritime data firm reported Tuesday that ship traffic through the strait more than doubled last week, but still remains a fraction of its pre-war levels. Trump did not set a firm deadline for Iran on Tuesday, at first saying he was given Tehran 2 or 3 days. He then said Iran could have until maybe early next week. He also said serious negotiations were underway to end the war. Key sticking points include U.S. insistence that Iran reopen the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping. An Iraq government spokesperson, Bassam al-Awadi, without mentioning the Emirati accusation, said that Baghdad expresses its strong condemnation of the recent drone attacks targeting the UAE. And you have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 20th, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader today has been Dan Arth, and I thank you for listening.